Welcome to the Executive Connect. Today, we're joined with Gay Gaddis, an entrepreneur, a best-selling author, a leadership coach, and a celebrated artist. Gay's journey from founding the largest women-owned independent digital ad agency in the United States to empowering the next generation of leaders is truly inspired. Welcome, Gay.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you today.
I always like to start off to talk about your journey into your field. So, what inspired you to start T3 and how did you grow it to be the largest women owned independent agency in the United States?
Well, it took step by step. It didn't happen overnight. I started as an art major at the University of Texas, and I went into the advertising business because in those days we had to draw everything, and I could draw. And so I was an art director. I was in the public relations, advertising, and even management consulting business before I started my own agency. So I had some years behind me before I launched off and took off to do my own thing. But I started my own company in 1989, and Austin was a very sleepy little town when I started the agency. There wasn't a lot going on here. And so it was kind of a risky, very risky thing to do, but the university and everyone was kind of behind me, and I just kind of launched off and did this. It took many, many years, though, to perfect what we wanted to do. But we always had this mantra from the very beginning, and it was kick ass work for clients who want to kick ass. And that defined what we wanted to do. So we were experimenting with new things. And when you said digital agency, of course, when I started the agency, we weren't digital because that wasn't even part of our language. We were a traditional advertising agency, but early on started shifting into any new mediums that we could think of or get our hands on. So when the internet became a viable option for marketing, we jumped into it with all fours and literally made that kind of our special area, which allowed us then later, as we grew along the way, to get into a lot of Fortune 100 companies because they were just beginning to figure out that they needed to maybe do some email marketing or some online advertising, or how are they going to create a website. So we were very early in all that. And then, one thing led to another. We ended up being at the top of almost 265 people. So it was a pretty big agency with offices around the country. And like I said, great Fortune 100 clients.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Leading an agency for 30 years is no small feat. What were some of the key leadership principles that guided you through your journey and building T3?
Leadership is the key of everything to me. And now in my life, it's what I focus on most. But you learn so much. And I believe that a lot of leaders were leaders as children. We talk about superpowers and what were you good at as a child. I took on leadership roles from the time I was a little girl, really, and then all the way through school and high school and college. And I was always kind of the one who would stand up and say, okay, I'll take that on, or I will lead that charge, or I will do it. So you learn a lot of hard lessons along the way. And I learned in high school, actually that I didn't learn how to bring people along sometimes. I would just say, this is the way we're going to do it. And that was a tough lesson for me to learn at that age because people did it, but they were begrudged and they didn't like it and then they hated me. So later I kind of realized that it's all about building a strong team, and the team has to shore up your weaknesses. So I knew at one point what my real strengths were, and I focused on those, and then I built people around me that were so good that could shore up my weaknesses. But the thing that was the most important, I think, is just to show up every day, being present, really giving people hope and energy, a vision, where are we going? And even if we didn't know where we're going, giving them an open opportunity to help create that. Being genuine and authentic. I know those words are overused, but that's true. Very transparent almost all the time. There were certain things you couldn't tell everybody in the agency, but a lot of things that we just needed to make sure people understood where we were going and what we were doing and why certain things happened. And so very, very open with the staff. I walked the halls every day. And I loved having people around me. I don't know how everyone works today in this hybrid model because for me, this spontaneity of being in an agency where everyone was, throwing ideas off each other and meeting each other in the hall with a cup of coffee and saying, hey, did you think about this? And, it's just those things you can't create any other way than just being there. And I worked hard. I felt like my example of rolling up my sleeves and working as hard as anybody else or harder was important. And so I tried to lead by example.
I love that. There's so many good nuggets of wisdom in that. And one of the things is building a culture that people want to show up to work. They want to feel safe to share their ideas. They want to, be comfortable, not agreeing and working together and collaborating. I think you're spot on. When people understand what they need to come up to do, they do it, right? They're all in when they're clear and they understand. And the other thing I love that you mentioned was you found people that weren't exactly like you, that other skill sets. So maybe some of your weaknesses, you found employees that could shore up, like you said, those weaknesses. So I love it. I'm a really big fan of your book, Cowgirl Power, How to Kick Ass in Business and Life. I've read it twice. I think it's great. Can you share maybe some of your top lessons in leadership from that book that you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, one of the things I like to say is that a lot of us are planners. All of us want to kind of set goals, plan. It's kind of part of our culture to, really say, all right, this is what I want to accomplish at this point. This is what I'm going to do here. So that's great. And we have to set financial goals. All those things are very, very important, and I'm all for it. But I have a saying that the path to success is not a straight line. And I found that to be so true in my life. What happens is we're marching along and we think we're hitting all the goals and all the steps. And then something hits you in the side of the head. I call it like a pinball machine and knocks you around. I call it, this life thing happens, and we can't predict it. I mean, the pandemic, a death in the family, a change in where you have to do your business. I mean, so many things, family changes. It just happens to us, and you can't predict it, and you can't affect it, and you can't control it. And that's the other thing that's so hard for people in leadership roles. I think the toughest thing for a leader is realizing sometimes you cannot control something. I mean, as much as you can fix everything you can take all the steps, you can try to mitigate an issue or problem, stay ahead of it. But there are times when it's just not in your control. And you have to be strong enough to realize that and say, okay, how are we going to keep moving? So when I say the path to success is not a straight line, there are things out of your control. There's things that are going to happen to you. But every time I've gotten knocked off the path, and I have many times in my career and life, when I finally step back on the path, I find that the path is a little different and maybe better than the one I had envisioned. And so it's interesting how the toughest things that can happen to us, and sometimes they're good things, but they still knock you off the path. But you get back and you have a new perspective or a new way of doing things. And so I don't love the path knocked off, but when you get there, you go back and you continue on, and things can become a lot more interesting, or new knowledge that you never had, that you wouldn't have had you not been thrown off that success path that you thought you were just hitting it all and doing great.
That's fantastic. I want to talk a little bit about, you're such a strong advocate for women in business, and you've started the Women Who Means Business program at the University of Austin, Texas. I want to talk a little bit about what motivated you to start that program and really pay it forward to women in the Austin and really across the United States.
I started off, making public speeches, sometimes to women's groups, many years ago. And then one day I was invited to do the keynote for a huge event in Tampa. And it was their chamber event, and there were like 1,000 people there. And it was targeted to women, but there were men and women there. And when I got off the stage, immediately everyone was coming up and, okay, we loved your story, all of that. Do you have a book? And I said, well, no, I don't have a book. They said, you need to write one. Your story needs to be told, because there's not that many women who started a business from the ground up. I mean, and I've looked at the statistics. I mean, what I was able to do is very rare. And I know that now. At the time you're just in it, just with the, putting on the harness every day and just going for it and growing and, and doing the right thing and trying to, grow business. And that's what I did and help our clients. But I finally realized this is a story that needs to be told. So I decided that I would write the book. And then that opened up the whole concept really for me. And I'd always kind of worked on women's issues. I mean, I'm a woman. I've been a woman in business, many years. So I wrote the book and then I started targeting women's groups because it was targeted to women. Cowgirl Power. It's a women's book. But men like it too. But it's still very much about empowering women and helping them to understand that the real key is that you've got the power inside already. It's there. You just have to understand it, tap it, understand your strengths, and then move forward with that. So I started touching so many women's groups in my book tours and in speeches, and I realized that there was so much to be done. And then the pandemic came along, COVID hit, and I started reading the news about how women were dropping out, and we were losing some of these key women in leadership roles because it just got to be too much. Because let's be honest, I mean, a lot of times women have the responsibility of their children, sometimes their parents, of a lot of things in the household or a lot of things in life, along with their work, with their business. And so women were saying, if you didn't need to do it, you dropped out and said, I'm not going to handle this anymore. So I said, we got to stop this. We got to stop the bleeding. And so I proposed this program to the University of Texas, the president of the university, and we put it over at McCombs Business School in executive ed. And we're starting our 5th cohort this fall. And Melissa, you will kind of maybe know this since you were there, but we've had tremendous success from the program. We are seeing women do exactly what we wanted to do. And it's not for the undergrads and grad students or even the ones out a few years. It's for women 10, 15, 20 years into their careers, already in leadership roles. But how do you catapult them to be absolutely at the top of their game? And we're seeing it over and over that women are getting there. I mean, they're taking those tough roles, taking on P&L responsibilities they'd never taken on. We had women wrote to us and said, I'm moving to Korea with my family. I'm taking over all operations for my company in Korea. She wouldn't have done that. She said she wouldn't have. It would have been too big of a risk. So we're trying to teach confidence and how to take risks. And, being a leader means risk taking. And some people don't have an appetite for that, but you've got to do that if you're ever going to get ahead. So I'm very excited about what we're doing there. I want to continue to spread as much as I can, maybe do another book someday, but it's really all about, how do we empower people to go out and do the best they can be and be leaders and not just there, but really taking on the tough roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on it. One of the things that I love too about the program is it gives women the opportunity to connect with women as well. A lot of times in leadership roles in tech and civil engineering, there's a lot of engineering women I know that went through the program. Their peers are really men. And we, like you mentioned, have different, nature, nurture responsibilities with children in a family and making decisions. So I think it's really giving women the practical steps to develop themselves, to have confidence in themselves to do it, and then to actually do it because someone's holding them accountable because now we're all watching, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about those practical steps that women can take to really develop their superpower, their personal power, whatever those steps may be, so they can actually advance their career. Any like nuggets of wisdom from that?
Yeah, you have to be able to dream. That's one of the big things that gets robbed from us sometimes as we get older. And, I reread a book called, The Last Lecture that came out in 2008 by Carnegie Mellon professor who was dying of cancer, and he had to do his last lecture. And he decided to do it about what happened with his childhood dreams and how so many of them had come to pass. And it's a really beautiful book about harnessing your dreams and really making this come true. So I have this exercise in the book called the dreams and reality exercise. And that's where I really invite people to step back and really dream again. Because if we don't dream and we can't envision, you won't take the steps to get there. And it's a really wonderful thing. It's hard to do sometimes. We're so, encumbered by the reality side. that you say, oh, I don't know if I ever can't do that. That's too hard. Or I don't want to tackle that. It costs too much money. I'll never raise that. I'll never be able to get a team around that. And so I'm in the middle of reimagining some dreams right now for myself. And it's a scary thing. I know what, I know. But I'm excited about it because it's things that I really want to accomplish. And then I talk about timelining your life, where you put all these things out of where are you going to be here, here, and here. And some of the things we kind of can expect. Maybe a child goes off to college that year, or maybe that's when I'm going to, we've decided we're going to have a vacation home at this point. And there's just things you can put on a big sticky board timeline and start to piece it together on where your life's going. And you put those dreams in there and it changes things, where you say, okay, what do I have to do right now or within the next year, or that dream's not going to ever be a reality. And so I'm just really kind of back in my dreams and reality mode again. And I think it's something I invite everyone to do, because you have to take a little time. And sometimes I say, and I do this, I live on a ranch part of the time in Texas, and I like to take a big quilt and throw it on the ground and look up in the sky and watch the clouds go by and just kind of think about, well, what else do I want to do? What's next? What would really thrill me, and what would help other people if I did it, or what would delight other people, or what would make someone else's life enriched and at the same time enrich mine. Because I don't think I truly believe that you get all the blessings back when you give away. I'm a real believer in that, and I think it's true. So I think about, what can I do there? What's going to make a difference? So that I'm kind of back in the dreams and reality mode again, and it's fun. And I invite everyone to really just say, okay, I'm going to take time to do that. Write it down. And if it's not for right now, and then maybe bring in some other people that are important in your life, that could they help you? Is that something they see as a reality, or something that they see could literally happen? And, when I started my company, it was like that. I had to convince a small little handful of people to come join me in this very risky venture and leave their jobs. They had other jobs when they hired them. And it was just a handful of people. But, I had to sell them my dream. I had to say, this is where I see this going. And they did. And so that's how the little things happen. It happens small sometimes, and then it turns into bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, again, now we're in cohort 5 of the Women Who Mean Business program. And that means that every time we only take 40 first class, but that's 40 people. So now we're in 200, people that will somehow be affected. And I can just see them like lights out there, affecting other people, bringing other people along, or really making an impact and a difference. So it's all kind of has a way of twinkling all around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said. What I heard is a couple of key things that you mentioned. One was, not letting life pass you by, like your friend that, mentioned that he had to give a speech, or people that let life pass. So I wish I would have done that. I wish I could have done that. But like you were saying, laying that blanket out outside and having a moment just to dream, like, what would my life look like if I did this thing, or I did that thing, or I achieved this goal, or what do I want my life to look like in 10 years? So I think that's a key piece of wisdom. There is a lot of times we're so reactionary in our world today that we're, getting the kids up, getting them to school, getting to work, doing our job, coming home, cooking, whatever your life looks like. We're all reacting to the day without a real plan, like you mentioned. So laying down 5, 10, 20 years, what does my life look like? You won't know, right, until you get 20 years later and you think, oh man, I wish I would have taken that trip, or I wish I wouldn't have
Yeah.
tried to do these things.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know, but life is so tenuous in many ways. And, you kind of get to a point like me where I'm saying, well, how many years do I really have? If I'm lucky, who knows? Or if I'm blessed, who knows if they're good years? But you have no time to waste, is how I feel about it. And I know we have to deal with the dirty socks and the laundry and all that stuff, like you said. I mean, that's just life. And, my husband used to say, if there's peanut butter smeared all over the back seat of the car, who's going to clean that up? I mean, just things like that, just life stuff, we have to deal with. But you can't take your eye off the big things, because that's where you achieve. And that's where, again, you can give back so much. One of the reasons that I I mean, I wanted to make money, of course, but you can make money at certain segments of a cycle of a business. And you can make a lot of money with 50 people. I mean, seriously, I knew how to do it. But then we get bigger and bigger. And one of the reasons that I kept growing the company was we wanted to do more for our clients. We knew we could help them. And the other thing was I was employing more people, and that was risky. I mean, of course, I had a big payroll, but it made me feel really good when I'd go home at night to think, you know what? 260 people got a paycheck today. It's because I continue to make this work, and I'm pushing hard. I'm growing the business, and I make it work. So that was a very gratifying thing to me to know that, gosh, you created jobs, and that was and again, and where people enjoyed practicing their craft and could trust each other and had a really good environment and culture where they wanted to be. And so it was very gratifying. I mean, it was just one of the best things I've ever done.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And all the lives you've changed, right? Yeah, I think you've changed so many lives, and like you said, paid it forward, and those people pay it forward, and it just becomes this big, bright, shiny light, like you mentioned. One thing I admire about you is your creative side, right? You're not only a businesswoman, but you're a very creative woman. And so I want to talk a little bit about creativity and how creativity can really help you develop yourself as a leader and really your journey in this world.
Well, fortunately, my father died when I was young. So my mother didn't oppose that I was going to be an art major at the University of Texas. And I probably, you think back, you say, well, I certainly could have majored in something else where I could have gotten out right away and had a business career, made money. But I loved the art side of my life. I was always very creative from the time I was a little girl. And from drawing, painting, all the things I did, but just creative thinking. I love to think of new things and come up with ideas and lead people into things. And we would have, like, in high school, we had these things called hall competition. So all the 4 grades in my high school would decorate their hall. Everyone had a hall, the senior hall, freshmen, sophomore. We decorate our hall and we compete and who got the prize. Well, I was always the one who came up with the concept of what it was going to be. And so I would come up with a concept, and everybody in the class would come up, and we would work and work and work on all the details to pull it together. And we won every year. I mean, it was just kind of a fun thing. But I've always had creative thinking in my wheelhouse. It's what I do. So that made for a good fit for me in the conceptual advertising marketing business, because that's kind of what we do. It's coming up with things that are never thought of before, or that you can really kind of, how do you do something that's going to get the attention of the audience? And so I love that. I mean, that was just how I was put together. And fortunately, I did have enough experiences before I started my business. And I did go back to business school at night. I have to tell you, after I graduated, I said I hadn't had one business class. And I felt like I didn't understand the language of business. And so I never finished my MBA because I had a child, and anyway, I couldn't do it. But I have so many business classes under my belt. And that really helped me when I started my business because, and I'd also worked for a management consulting firm. And those guys all had their MBAs from Harvard, and they taught me a lot. So I had fortunate things along the way, but all of those required that I stepped out and did something that wasn't necessarily what you would have thought, and so I always say, when everybody zigs, sometimes you have to zag, because, just because everything's going this way, why don't you try something else? And I always would try to do that. I still do. And you have to put yourself in situations where things are going to happen. If you're just kind of bemoaning that you haven't accomplished this, or this isn't happening, or you haven't accomplished this for your family, get yourself, I always say, put yourself out there. That's part of my book. And you got to, force yourself sometimes, even if you're an introvert, to get into situations. And you mentioned something really important about the Women Who Mean Business program. The network that you develop is so incredibly important. And we love it that women could find, and that's why we had women older, a little bit older, not the younger grads, because we wanted women who had already experienced leadership roles, already been out there, and could relate and be peers. And so I have been fortunate enough to have some women's organizations like the Committee of 200, C200, Lynn Utter, who teaches a Women Who Mean Business program with me, and I've met through that. And it gave me a strong sense of other successful women. And when I kept seeing it and I could ask questions and we could, hold each other's hands through the good and the bad. And, it just really, really made a huge difference in my career. And I was fortunate enough to be invited to be in that group many years ago, and I'm still a member. But it has helped me so much, through the years to have that network. And I cannot say how important that is. And sometimes you start small. I mean, when I first started networking and doing things, my world was a lot smaller, and then it kind of grew and grew and grew. But you've got to take those first steps to get out and meet people, and you never know what you're going to find out, what you're going to learn, or how you can help each other.
Yeah, and I've always been told your net worth or your network is what your net worth is. And it's not just that doesn't just mean about money. It's not just about money. It's, maybe you are going through something challenging in your life and it's the first time you've navigated it, and somebody else who's been through it, and having, like you mentioned, relationships and people you can call that have been through some tough things in life, and having somebody that you can bounce ideas off really is worth all the money, all the tea in China that they say. But it's really worth it, and you're spot on. Having relationships and a network and somebody to call is really key. And I know you mentioned a little bit about the leaders today having to navigate working from home, right? That's something that we've not had to navigate. Managers and leaders haven't had to manage teams across the world behind a computer. So I want to talk a little bit about the current trends in leadership and what is most crucial from your perspective for leaders today.
Well, one of the things that I learned from one of my C200 members during the pandemic, and she said that they learned a lot on how to deal with people in these environments, in virtual environments. But she said sometimes they would start the meeting instead of just jumping into the agenda with letting everyone just kind of tell something that was going on in their life, and maybe it was during the pandemic, so it was a little, different, but just kind of learning people as human beings. And that's what was so valuable to me in running my business is I knew everybody in the company. I knew a lot about them, really. I asked. I mean, we had families bring their kids in, and we had all kinds of, events and things where I got to know the people as who they were and what things they were interested in outside of T3 and their work. Because I always said that's so important. I want you out there doing things. If you've got a volunteer thing you're working on and you need to take off tomorrow afternoon, go do it. Or, you want to understand who people are. And then they're not just another talking head on the screen or another VP of sales or whatever. They become a person to you. And then you can kind of understand how they're wired up and what's going to help motivate them and what can you do for them that's going to give them, that extra oomph, to keep going. And so it's very, very important, I think, even in a virtual environment, to take the time to get to know your staff and hopefully do some things with them in person now, go out for a picnic, do something, get out and brainstorm, go sit somewhere, just having that time together where you're not specifically dealing with one task, or that task of the day, just opening up to the what ifs and, or how are you doing? And that goes a long way.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a great piece of advice is know who you're working with. Don't just be so mission focused on a task that you lose sight of people in the process. And I think the real great leaders I've had in my life, they knew a little bit more about me than what my title or what my role was. And so I was willing to work harder for them, right? When
Yeah.
they saw me, they understood me, they valued me, and they made time to just talk to me. And so I
Right.
would absolutely agree with you. You talked a little bit about it at the beginning about going back to school to get some business education to learn more. And so, first of all, I think that's a really great point. Know your skills, know what you're good at, like you were saying, and know what you need to work on, and then do the work. I think one of my favorite words is resiliency. It's been a lifelong favorite word, and adaptability. I think the world's changing so much so quick that we really have to be resilient and adapt to what's coming at us every day. So I want to talk a little bit about cultivating resiliency and adaptability in today's world, and just get your perspective and on how to cultivate these skill sets to be a better leader.
I go back to my childhood again. I had parents and people around me. I grew up in a small town. It was very like a fishbowl. You knew what everybody was doing, and it was very open. And so I watched people with tremendous struggles, and I knew what was going on. And I would always say, wow, if they can get through that, surely I can get through what I'm doing today. And it was just I just would watch people. And then see how they reacted and how they came through that and the words of wisdom they had. And so that was kind of my basis, really, of, trying to keep going, and I've just had this can do attitude my whole life that was instilled in me and my parents. I mean, it's like, you can do it, you can do it. And I know so many people grow up and have very discouraging households, and they are not empowered, they're not, encouraged, they're not thought they were wonderful. And so that's already a tough load you carry, to begin with. But being able to just say, how can I, again, I'm going to go back to this. If I am strong enough to get through this and I can do this, and if I can just push one more inch farther, who will I help? What kind of difference am I going to make? And it really does keep you going. When you think you've done something that helped somebody or really made a difference someplace, it's very exciting when that happens. So, it keeps me going. I also, grew up, I've been a rancher for my whole life too, and, still do that. And there's a lot of reality in the country, I call it. And I saw 3 realities this week. I mean, we had a skunk spray my dog, which is not fun. And then we had a coral snake that was crawling around the swimming pool, and they're highly poisonous. And then there was a baby rabbit that was caught by one of my dogs, and I don't know what happened anyway, but that's just reality. I mean, that's just what happens out there. And, we had a fire not too far from us, not on our property, but not too far. And that was a very scary thing. And so life just kind of, and the country is, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, you can't predict when the snake's going to come by. It's just, it's just different than living in a city, and you just have to roll with it in some ways and know that, okay, whatever the problem is today, we're going to try to deal with it the best we can. And I think that's given me a lot of resilience. I've just grown up in that environment. But if you haven't, it's just, everybody has their own issues in whatever environment they have or whatever company they're in or whatever. And it's just saying there's got to be a way around this. I can do it. If I can't, I'll figure it out, or I'll have to move on. And when I said you can't control everything, you can't. But you can control how you feel about it. And that's a very important lesson. You don't have to play the negative videos over and over in your head. Turn them off. The ones I can't do it, or someone criticized me, or, this happened. Turn off those videos, because they don't help you or anybody else to keep playing them in your head. They only push you back. So I think we have to be strong mentally too. It's not just the, strength, that oomph, but it's a mental strength and perseverance that really gets you through.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great advice, is, being able to tackle things as they come and not thinking things are happening at you, they're happening for you. Like you said at the beginning, some of these challenging things you went through, some of the most beautiful things were on the other side of that challenge. And so I think, just like you said, getting the negative out of your head and really going back to what you also said, was getting a plan together. And, if it sets you back a year, get back on the yellow brick road and go after that 5-year plan, because there are going to be setbacks. None of us get out of life without having some setbacks and some struggles and some changes. So it's really having that attitude, like you were saying, to be positive and to just say, hey, I need to, handle the dog with the skunk and clean them up and
And you know
make
what?
sure.
I have a great recipe for what you wash a dog who's been skunked. I've had dogs skunked, as we call it, many times. And so I found this was the Humane Society actually came out with a special thing you mix up to rub on the dog. I mean, I won't share that at this moment, but yeah, I mean, you have to learn these things. So when you know things like this can happen, you also have to have your toolkit ready to, okay, what do I do when what do you do when the snake's coming? What do you do when this happens?
That's
And you
right.
just kind of you get prepared as much as you can. You can't be prepared for everything, but you just kind of say, all right, I know I've been through that, and how am I going to handle it? Just like with anything.
Right. And then or know who to call, right? Right. Like you said, like if my dog got hit with a skunk, being able to call you and say, "Hey, what'll I do? I got to get to this, event. I'm going to leave the dog outside or I'm going to have somebody come over and take care of him." And so I think it's just finding a plan on how to attack things and
That's right.
so many good pieces of advice that you shared. Another thing I admire about you is how you straddle so many different, passions, hobbies. You're an accomplished author. You have, taught some college classes. You've run businesses. You're into the art and painting and, paying it forward and nonprofits. You straddle so many different, passions, hobbies, businesses. And I know branding is really important these days. And typically we're either, branded by our job or branded by our family. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you've been able to take all of the things you love and are passionate about and really brand yourself in a way that, you're giving to the world and you're giving to Gay and you're making the world a better place. So I know that was a lot in, two long sentences, but just kind of your insights on straddling so many different things and so many different passions, and really keeping the mission focused. If you could share some insights on that.
Yeah, I do straddle a lot of different things. And partly it's because, honestly, I get bored very easily. And I'm just going to say that. I like to have different things going on because to me, being involved in one thing feeds the other. And so, what I will learn by getting out of just my little silo and jumping over here to do this, and as you said, I'm a painter. I was trained as a painter and artist in college, but I didn't really get to passionately do that until a few years ago, and I've been successful with it. I have my own gallery. I've been shown in New York and Santa Fe and Houston. I mean, I have a nice following, and it's been great to paint. I love to paint. I paint at the ranch. But see, that's all part of my brand because I feel like when I told you I grew up on ranches and farms, I am in my heart a country girl. And I understand nature and the country. And so when I paint, I'm painting the skies that I see at our ranch and sometimes some landscape, but they're really abstract most of the time. But it's all kind of this what I take in every day. So being aware of who you are and being very consistent with that is part of the brand. It's just like when we would build a brand for a client. You would, Coca-Cola would not put red in their logo tomorrow. I mean, that would be terrible. I mean, here I have red on. I look like Coca-Cola red today. But it's just the simplicity of being very consistent with who you are, what you say, how you dress, where you show up, the actions you take, all those things, and being not necessarily predictable, but being, and again, using this word genuine, it's just who is it that you are, and you stick with it and you just do it over and over and over because people can't remember too many things. It's really true. And so, again, when we would build brands for big companies or, whatever, we had to make sure that the customer experience was that they knew who you were. And sometimes we'd come up with a campaign or we'd come up with an idea and we say, wow, that's off brand. That doesn't make sense. The customer is not going to recognize that that's Pizza Hut. The customer is not going to recognize that is that Allstate sending me that? That's not like Allstate. And so you want to educate, entertain, and surprise, but you don't want to be off brand. So think about yourself as this brand that, when I show up, it's always me. I'm not trying to be anybody else. I'm not trying to act in a different way. I don't try to change my accent. I have this East Texas accent. To hell with it. I mean, it's how it sounds. And that's me. And so, it's just kind of my colors that I use in my logo and my website and typefaces and just everything that we do when we communicate should be consistent. Now, you can rebrand, and kind of shift some, but basically it's got to be something that is true to you, and finding that and who you are. Um, and I'm kind of known to be a bit of a fashionista, and I have to live up to that. I really do. It's like work for me sometimes. I plan like my clothes that I'm going to be wearing for events. And I'm creative with that. I don't just buy the outfit at the store, wear it with the shoes they put with it. No, no. I've got, I have this little piece from Target, and this thing I bought at a thrift store, and this thing that was Chanel. It's just all these things I put together, but it takes work. But to me, it's like putting together a creative puzzle. But when I show up someplace, usually people say, "Oh, I love that outfit," or "Where'd you get that purse?" Or and it's because I curate my clothes, and that's just kind of who I am. So it's part of my brand. So all these things I'm saying is that it doesn't matter if you just wear a t-shirt and blue jeans every day. If that's you, that's you. And you know what? Let's be consistent with that, and that's your look. And I've known a lot of people who just wear a jacket, t-shirt, and jeans, and that's their look, and they look great. So it's not just clothes; it's everything. But it's more about how you treat people, how you act, and how you show up, and that's where the brand really is. And being consistently you is the key.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's spot on, Gay. I'm gonna call them gayisms. Any other kind of, as we close, that we covered so much fantastic information. Anything that we missed that you want to share with our listeners before we close up?
Yeah, I have this. I want you all to look up something. Um, there's a poem that was written by Rabbi Lawrence Kushner. It's called "The Puzzle," and it really stemmed. I found this thing because I listened to my dad a lot as a child, and even though he died when I was 13, he used to say, "Meet people where they are," and he explained that to me what that meant. And so that's another part of this whole network thing. I meet people everywhere I go, and that's another reason why I'm mixing it up and being in different venues and different kinds of audiences is fun, because I meet a lot of different people and I try to get to know them, and that becomes a valuable part of your network. But there's a puzzle poem, like I said, and basically what it says is that all of us are carrying around pieces of someone else's puzzle, and we don't know